Hey guys, so today's just going to be a quick short video on everything about lines, and specifically handwriting, cartoons, representational work, and then at the very end we're going to be doing a study. So let's get right into it. A line is an art fundamental, like shape, like value, like color. It's an important thing to understand in isolation so that once you put it into a larger work of art, it can sing like an orchestral performance with trumpets and flutes and other instruments. But if we're just looking at the trumpet, for example, which is the lines, let's say, then we need to understand what it actually is per se. So a line is a deviation between two value shapes. Now, what do I mean by that? If we have two shapes, let's say this weird U shape, and then we have a buddy shape, say this kind of folded pentagon, right? We can see that there's lines deviating, the difference between them. And if we put a little bit of value in this shape right here, then we can say that the lines deviating between these two shapes right here, there's a line right there. And then obviously there's a line deviating between the white of the page and the rest of this shape as well. So this definition seems unimportant, let's say, but it's important for recognizing what it actually is in more complicated works of art. So if we look at it right here, in the leg, we know that there's a line going down this leg because there's a difference in value between the darker leg and the lighter leg. So when you're sketching out your work before you actually render it out, a lot of people put down the general lines. And what that is saying, this is where the background is and this is where the foot starts or stops, right? So lines are an interesting thing because it's the silhouette of the figure. And if you have a very interesting, abstractly sophisticated outline, then it's going to work much better for you in the end product. So what do I mean by that? Well, we have to go into the mystery of handwriting actually to understand this. So we all know that some handwriting is better than other handwriting. And I've always found this topic very interesting because it's a visual art in a certain sense. I think nobody would disagree with that. There's obviously calligraphy and there's manuscript and there's a lot of different ways of going about it. Some look better and some don't look as good. So we all knew some guy back in high school who drew like this, and it looked god awful. Nobody liked it. It made everybody cringe. There's no energy or interest in it, and it's quite frankly terrible. So, but what is this? What is handwriting? It's a bunch of lines, right? So if we can understand what makes handwriting beautiful, it's actually interesting. It transfers right over into your representational or even cartoon art, and we can get into that. So if we put this as a line in manuscript, it has a little bit of organic line weight, and there's some thicker lines and thinner lines and all this other stuff. But it's generally, it's just handwriting. It's not too interesting, but at least it makes more sense than that. And it looks a little bit more aesthetic. Now, that might bring you to the idea that the more clear it is, the more attractive it is. And that is true in a certain sense. But if you make it more and more clear, it doesn't become more aesthetically attractive, but it does become much more understandable. So you can see that this text right here in the book, which is titling this ink by Frank Frazetta, it doesn't look really that interesting or artful, but it does make total sense because you can understand what it's literally trying to say. So we need to find a balance between being literal and being expressional. So there's too much expression going on right here. And maybe there's a little bit too much literal amount right here, right? But I think in cursive is where we find this nice, neat balance where we can transfer that over into our drawings. And it'll be just clear enough so that we know that that's a leg, for example, but not so clear that it looks like modern hyper-realistic art that has no energy or emotion to it. So let's look at handwriting that might actually do that. So if we have cursive, for example, then, and maybe you can't read this if you're a little bit younger, but but if we have cursive, for example, like right here, it meets a sort of balance that's interesting. It has a lot of energy and zest to it, but it also makes sense and you know what it's trying to say. This is illiterate, this is too it's too tight, and this makes more sense. So let's get into how to actually use this. So first we're going to go up a step of abstraction. We were just talking about lines in isolation and it didn't look like anything, right? They're just S's and C's and whatever. But let's take it up into a representational level. And we meet cartoons. So I'm going to show a picture of the old Mickey Mouse from Disney. Besides Disney's ethics today and in the past, we're going to appreciate the art style of this cartoon. So the art style here is very interesting. The old Mickey Mouse looked almost as if it was cartoon cursive. And I think you'll know what I mean by that when you see it compared to the new Mickey Mouse. The new Mickey Mouse in this image is a lot tighter. You know, there's still some energy. It kind of looks like this, you know, whereas the old one had a lot more interest to it. And if we get the same emotion from this as we do the new Mickey Mouse and from the cursive to the old Mickey Mouse, we can kind of understand how artists use lines to actually create energy and interest in their pictures. So the old Mickey Mouse had a lot of interesting shapes that were drawn quickly. They had a lot of motion. And if you want to learn how to design shapes in an interesting way, go check out one of my videos. I'll leave it in the description or an icon page right there. But the way they designed their shapes was through this sort of cursive shorthand. Whereas the new shapes, they make more sense, you know, but they're a little bit more literal. Now, it depends on stylistically what you want to do, but it's important to understand how to do both of these at the same time. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive into representational work and how a lot of these correlate to that instead of just cartoons now that we're going up the grade. So if we look at this Philip de Laszlo painting that I'm going to put up on the right, he's a little-known artist, but he's said to be the successor of John Singer Sargent, who was a famous portrait painter. And de Laszlo actually started painting the year that Sargent retired, quote-unquote, or he died, one of those. But de Laszlo always did a really good job of having a lot of bravado with his brushwork while still maintaining a lot of simple and designed curves. So the painting that I'm showing you right now has this really beautiful S-curve right down the side of the right side of the figure. And I can see right now because I'm projecting it after I edit this, but it's something very simple like that, right? The side of the figure isn't overcomplicated. There could have been folds of fabric, or there could have been an arm in the way, or there could have been design on the chair that she was sitting on, or whatever, that could have distracted from the general simplicity of the image. But because it was simple and it was quick and boom, it was done gesturally, just like handwriting, right? If we have an S right there for handwriting, just like how handwriting is done quicker and it looks better generally when you're trying to make it quicker and not trying to get it perfect, right? When you go quicker and it has more spunk to it and gesture, it looks more interesting. So the same goes for artwork when you're trying to actually representationally make something. And just like a lot of other master artists, Sargent and Philip de Laszlo worked very quickly. In fact, there's a video that you can look up. I highly suggest looking it up after this one. There's this video of de Laszlo actually working in his studio, and it's very interesting because he obviously painted 100 or so years ago, but there's an actual video of him painting, and he's very, very quick, and Sargent was also known for working quick. And that's not because they're so good or whatever that they can work quick. It's that working quick actually makes you better. It makes it look a lot better in the end product. So let's take what we learned from handwriting from that de Laszlo painting, and let's actually implement it into a study of Frazetta. So Frazetta did this all the time. He was amazing at simplifying his shapes, his curves, everything to design it really well. And when we're talking about handwriting and simplification and lines and all this other stuff, we're talking about the idea of design. How do you take what you see as your reference, and then how do you make it better? How do you make it look more visually attractive? How do you simplify it, etc.? That's the idea of design, and nobody better did it than Frazetta. So let's do a little study of this ape here, and you can do a study yourself as well. So just pull out a pad and paper and try to implement some of these ideas that I've been talking about. So you can see right here that this is verging on a cartoon, kind of interestingly, but it's still representational, and it lives in that sort of half representational, half cartoon land, almost like cursive does. But you can see that everything is really, really simplified, and it looks almost like cursive. So we can see that this trunk right here is just that really simple curve. And if you're doing this exercise at home, don't feel the need to make everything perfect. try to simplify every single line, as in the deviation between form or value masses. Try to simplify it all into either C's, S's, or straights. And once you do that, you can really understand how he did it so energetically and simply. So you can see that right down the side of this trunk here, that's just an S curve. Right down here, that's another S curve. Right there, that's just a normal C curve. And you can see that he didn't overcomplicate. He didn't add in, you know, if I was going to overcomplicate it, let's say we have this S curve right here, you'd like kind of, you know, it just wouldn't have the energy of the original. So let's go to even the horns here, you can see look like a crescent moon. Really simple, you know, boom. And it had so much energy to it. And Frazetta loved using these large horns. There's this famous mammoth painting I'll put up that he did, and it had the same sort of energy and interest to it. But you can see from doing these studies, and it's really interesting to actually study cartoons as well, especially the old Disney. And they did this to the extreme. Everything was oversimplified to the point where it would lose a little bit of its representation, and it'd start looking obviously like what we call a cartoon. But if you can take your representational work and you can add in this kind of interesting abstract work with your line work and everything else, it makes everything have a lot more interest, energy, and passion to it that a lot of overworked art does. So if you have a problem with overworking your art and not getting that kind of zest and emotion that you see other master artists doing, I would highly suggest doing a lot of these exercises. Just look at somebody in your class at work, just look at an object, whatever, and try to simplify it down into 3 or 4 lines. And once you do that, you can really understand how people design things like they design interesting handwriting. Even look at this claw right here. It goes all the way from the claw to the tail, and it's just this one simple line. Frazetta could have moved the arm back here, and that would have disrupted this long gestural line, but he didn't do that. And because he didn't, it's just a way more interesting work of art. If you can simplify all your figures or your trees or your landscapes or whatever you're doing, it doesn't even matter. Anything that you can visually put on paper, if you can simplify it using these techniques that I've been talking about, it's really going to push your work into a next level ability. So that was the quick video for today. I hope you guys have a great day. Go make something beautiful, and all the best. I'll see you later.